Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the 2020 Bibliometrics and Research Assessment Symposium. My name is Chris Belter, and along with my colleague Yaoling Liu, I am one of the co-hosts for this event. Before we get started with our next session, I have a couple of quick announcements to make, just as some reminders for folks who may have just joined us or may have joined from previous days. We are recording this session, but we're not recording the attendees or the chat. So just be aware that none of the attendees are going to be part of any of the recordings that we actually make. Audio is provided in broadcast only mode, so all attendees are muted, and there's no need for attendees to join the audio session. The audio should just come through your computers, and you should be just fine. Since attendees are not going to be able to unmute, please ask all questions in the chat box. Please ask both questions of our speakers and any questions about technical issues. Please do send messages to the chat, and remember to send your messages to everyone so that way we can all see it. We have a number of folks monitoring the chat box who are in a range of both attendees and panelists. So please, if you want your question answered, please send it to all attendees. And please send it to everyone, excuse me. Finally, live captions are available in the multimedia viewer panel in the lower right of the WebEx screen, and they are also available at the URLs that were just shared in the chat. So with that, we are going to go ahead and move into our first training session of the day. And for that training session, we have a team of folks from digital science, including Duane Williams, Jennifer Botchway, and Monika Dunbar, to give us a training session on the dimensions database. So Duane, I know you're starting the presentation. So are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Your slides look great, so take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. As Chris said, my name is Duane Williams. I'll be co-presenting with two of my colleagues, Monika Dunbar and Jennifer Botchway. For this training session today, we'll give a brief overview of dimensions, a product from digital science. There's actually quite a lot to dimensions, so it's hard to give a proper training on dimensions, especially within just an hour, especially to a diverse audience. But we've got a plan that hopefully will cover, some of the basics, and we'll give you some examples of how it's used. So hopefully you'll find this session very useful, especially the examples. Hopefully you'll find those very helpful. All right, the agenda for today, we'll start with some brief introductions to the presenters, and we will also introduce digital science as a company. I know there were some references in the last talk by Chris Walcott, so some of that will be fleshed out a bit more. Then we'll walk through the goals for today, and I'll give some context covering some of the basics of the Dimensions product. From there, we'll have some brief examples of use cases from different clients, and this will be the bulk of the talk. Monika will start. She'll give some examples from nonprofits and smaller funders. Then Jennifer will follow up. She'll give some examples from larger funders. Specifically, in this case, it'll be examples from the Department of Defense. We, of course, won't be sharing any such client work, but just examples of the types of questions that clients ask us, just to illustrate how and when dimensions can be used. And at the end, we'll finish up by fielding any questions that you leave in the chat. So hopefully that works well for everyone. So with that, I'll go ahead and do the introductions. We'll start with Monika, since she'll be speaking first. We're not transitioning slides yet because it's still me, but Monika, if you can just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, I am Monika Dunbar, and I work primarily with small to large funders, nonprofits, and governments. My background's actually grants management. I got my start at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and later the Foundation for the NIH. I then changed direction a little bit by going to a grants management software company where I worked with hundreds of funders on their grants operations, and then moved to digital science about 4 years ago, where I continue that work with funders and now governments too. Over to you, Jen.
Hi, thanks, Monika. So again, my name is Jennifer Botchway. I've been with digital science for about 6 months now. My background is in molecular biophysics. Prior to joining digital science, I served as the Director of Strategy, Policy, and Planning at a nonprofit tied to Virginia Tech, so really helping different government clients really understand the power of their data to help inform their decision-making. And before that, began my career really in government service, leading a variety of different technical development efforts. Duane?
Great. So thank you, Monika and Jen. So just a little about me. I won't take very long, but my background is actually in theoretical chemistry, but I've worked most of my career as a senior analyst and project manager, first at Thomson Reuters, supporting a variety of different clients, but a lot of them were in the government space, helping with portfolio analysis, and I guess just more broadly helping to use research data to demonstrate the impact of funding, something that we've heard a lot about over the past 2 days, among other analytical projects. Before we move off of this slide, I just want to note a few things here. The folks on the call here, we work as a team, so you can actually reach out to any one of us with questions. Feel free to do that by email. I've got our email on every single slide, so hopefully that'll be good for reaching out. But if you've got general questions or more fundamental questions, you can also feel free to send an email to support@dimensions.ai. So with that introduction to us, I want to move to an introduction to digital science, and Chris spoke a little bit about this in the prior presentation. If you're not familiar with us, digital science is actually a portfolio of companies. So there are multiple parts here with a common thread that these companies help with research decisions, with research data, with research information, and those sorts of applications. The main focus of the talk today, of course, is Dimensions. So that's one product. But just for context, I'll just say a few quick words about some of the other parts of the company that may be of interest to the audience. For example, if you stick with us after our talk, the next session will be from one of our colleagues, Anna von Gulick. She'll be talking about Figshare. That's one of the products. Figshare, short for Figshare. It's a fair data sharing platform designed to make research fair, so researchers can post their data and make it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That's what the acronym FAIR stands for. Some of the other products, we have an end-to-end grants management software from CT Technology. Repeta and Gigantum focus on research reproducibility. Symplectic Elements has an expert profiling system. And yet another company, Altmetric, which if you attended the session yesterday, you and Eddie was the founder of Altmetric. This captures the broader impact of research outputs. So for example, if you've published a research article, this can tell you if that article has been cited by policy guidelines globally, if it's been blogged about by medical practitioners. So just other aspects of the impact of your research beyond just counting citations. We serve a lot of different client bases. So if you're familiar with us, you probably know we do a fair amount of work within the NIH, but we also support the NSF, DoD, a lot of agencies from the smallest nonprofits and to the largest universities, publishers, and much more. So that's a little bit about digital science. And let's see here. The goals for today are a few. The first one is to provide a high-level understanding of the Dimensions platform. And another goal is to give some food for thought, giving some examples of how Dimensions is used, give a bit of clarity on options for engaging with us. That's from using the web application to our application programming interfaces to bulk data. And then another key one is to identify points of contact for any follow-on questions. And as I said, our email addresses are in every slide, and you can reach us at support@dimensions.ai. So with that background covered, I'll walk through some of the basics of the Dimensions product. A useful starting point is publications and citations. This is, after all, a Bibliometrics conference, so that's a good place to start. Typically, when data is used to address these kinds of research questions, it is very often, almost always, publications and citation data is all of it, if not the bulk of it, right? And let me explain why that is. It's a very useful data set. We develop it ourselves, and we all understand that's why we're on the call. But Dimensions was designed to help to flesh out a bit more context around what happens within research. And I actually saw that Chris used this slide in the previous presentation on the work that we did for NIAID. But I'll flesh this out just a bit more. So Dimensions, in addition to being a publications database with citation data and other metrics like the relative citation ratio and other citation metrics that are useful. One of the main reasons Dimensions was developed, one of the main reasons was to flesh out some of these other parts, like the grants data. And you've heard a lot of references earlier on. I think Cassie mentioned the usefulness of having grants data in her presentation at noon and others. So grants are useful for a variety of different reasons, right? First, as an analyst, we frequently get questions about how much money is being invested in a given area of research. And so grants can help you to do that. We mentioned a global grants database. So we can say, for example, how much China is investing in artificial intelligence in the past 10 years, or how much the European Union or Australia, all of this from the based on, or give insight into it. And in terms of once we speak about grants data, one of the frequent questions is the breadth of the coverage for all these different data sets that I'll refer to. We always strive to be as comprehensive as possible. It's never going to be 100% complete. And then we always also strive to flesh out additional content sets. So this is kind of a perspective on what Dimensions looks like today, but not a complete perspective on certainly not what it would look like tomorrow. Another note on grants, it's also a different content set, right? So our grants database has titles and abstracts of the grants data in addition to funding amounts and organizations and research information. We'll show a lot of examples of this. So if you were to use a text mining method to try to understand what's happening within the research landscape, publications will give a different perspective than grants will, right? Because publications are a bit narrower. They're one stream of work that's been successful and has the researcher deemed worthy of publishing and was able to get it published. Grants give a broader perspective. It's more the general ideas that the researcher was going for. So what she or he was thinking about when they were initially envisioning the stream of work. They also come earlier. So grants are an earlier indicator of what's happening. After you receive a grant, it's a few years before the publication will actually come out. And on that point, the Dimensions database also has preprints. So we have over 2 million preprints of articles. So you can get, it's all these different content sets, so you can get an earlier indicator of what's happening. And then in terms of subsequent events in the research lifecycle, we do have altmetrics to provide blogs and tweets and much more policy documents and other things. Dimensions database also has clinical trials, patents. So it's all these different databases. You can consider it kind of a database of databases. And one of the important parts about that is that it's not just the individual databases, right? So one of the key reasons that Dimensions was developed was to establish the links between the different data sets and among across the different data sets. So for example, if you've got Dimensions, of course, has grant data. So if you've got a grant, a very frequent question, and one that we'll touch on even more, you're looking at the impact of that grant. So within Dimensions, we search the full text of the article, look at the acknowledgement section to identify grants, and then get back to the individual grant record where possible. As mentioned in some earlier talks, many acknowledgement sections may not mention the exact grant number. We do some grant number cleaning up. If there's no number at all, we'll map it back to the agency. And from there, from there you can imagine if you look at a grant in the Dimensions database, you'll see not just the title, abstract, funding amounts, and those bits of information, but you'll also see the outputs that have acknowledged that grant. You'll see the list of publications that resulted, the list of patents that acknowledge the grant, and so on. So what that means then is that looking at a grant, you can not just trace it to, not just look at the individual grant, not just trace it to the individual output, but also all the links across there. So you can look at the resulting publication and other publications that have cited that publication, or patents that have cited that publication. And that was also mentioned in the database in the previous talk as well. So a big part of it is linking these different data sets together. But another critical part of the Dimensions platform is the middle panel here in the dark gray, the enrichment of the data that we collect. So a big part of our effort with Dimensions is in cleaning the data and making it ready for actual analyses, right? So garbage in, garbage out. And we all know that it's a whole lot of, trying to use this data can be pretty messy. So to that end, we've established a lot of different things to help with that, including identifying institutions and cleaning that up. In fact, we have an entire product that's freely available called Grid. It cleans up institutions, research institutions. We extract concepts and we categorize everything that's within the database. So every single document, whether it's a publication or a grant or a patent, it's all categorized using natural language processing. So it's based on the titles and abstracts of the grant into a variety of different categories. We can field questions about that, but most of your questions about that will probably refer you back to some extensive documentation that we have on that. We also do researcher disambiguation. Whenever I mention that, there's a question of how clean it is, how perfect it is. With all these things, we're always striving for perfection, but it's never going to be perfect. It's always just going to be as clean as we can possibly get it, right? From that, if you move to the right panel, you'll see that there's, as a result of this, we have these entities. And here, for example, since we extract concepts, you can do things like look at emerging concepts within research, or you can look at a researcher, a profile of a researcher or an organization because they've already been cleaned and mapped to these different outlets. And I mentioned that we classify every single document. But going back to the profiles, it's a useful thing to think about. So you can imagine kind of coming out of this plane on the left, and you can look at an individual person, and you'll have a profile of that person across these different content sets. And when I say profiles, that's typically the first thing that you think about is a researcher profile. I just want to give a few other examples of the kinds of profiles that Dimensions has. So here's an example of a profile of a funding agency. So this is the Education Directorate from the National Science Foundation in the U.S. And this is the profile as represented from the Dimensions data. So it's got over 46,000 resulting publications, data sets, grants, 940 patents. So that's one, and again, and actually Monika will show more within the web application, but when we say that it has 46,817 publications, and I took this snapshot a couple months ago, but when we say that it has that, our data is all transparent. So you can see the list of those publications. You can download that and do other exercises with it. If you think that something is amiss, it also gives you an opportunity to give us feedback, and we work with the community. We pride ourselves on working with the community to fix errors, to ensure that it's in the right direction, and that our product is always helpful. Another way to think about profile is a profile of a university. In this case, I've chosen a small community college, and that's just to show that our databases are not just going to capture the most prestigious institutions, right? So if any organization or anything that's associated with one of these outputs, we'll pull it out and you'll be able to see that. So here's a small community college that's got 52 grants and 6 data sets and 31 publications. Another example of that is here's a company that's got a lot of publications and 641 patents in clinical trials. So it just gives you a sense that we've got a profile across all these different content sets to represent these different entities. And of course, we do have profiles of people. Dimensions has several different views of profiles of people. This is one view that I chose just to show a few unique features. So of course, we do have the outputs, the publications, data sets, and so on. But in this case, by working with ORCID and other organizations, using public information, so it's not taking any private information, we can also show the education and experience of a given researcher. So these kind of rich profiles is one of the things that we strive to achieve with Dimensions. And so with that kind of as a backdrop and hopefully a good springboard, I'll turn it over to Monika. So Monika will start sharing her screen now to give you some examples from the small nonprofits and funders.
Hey, Duane. I think you have to hand it to me. There you go. All right.
Okay.
Share my screen. Let's assume I'm picking the right one. All right. Hold on. All right. So thank you, Duane. As I mentioned earlier, one of the types of groups I work with is small to large nonprofit funders. So I'll be talking about some common uses they have as a way to take you through Dimensions. So I thought the best way to do this would be to take us through, at a very high level, the life of an RFP, a request for proposal. So when thinking about a new area that you may want to fund, some common first steps are to first see who else is funding in this area and what it is that they're funding. And that can help you either narrow, expand, or maybe even change the focus of the RFP entirely. Once you've settled on what your RFP will be targeting, you would need to find relevant experts. These could be to build your review committee, or maybe it's an invitation-only submission. You're looking to reach out to invite people. And then down the road, after you've gone through the process of getting applications, reviewing and awarding them, you'll want to know what impact they have. All right, so now that I've set the stage for what we'll be looking at in dimensions, we can start. So first, we have two questions. What's being funded and who's funding it? And we can use the dimensions UI to search using categories and keywords, looking at only title and abstract or full text. And I believe we have about 70% full text coverage of our over 110 million pubs. And within dimensions, you can view the results and use the built-in visualizations to explore the data. So let's head into dimensions to look at this. So although dimensions covers every area of study, I do want to give a nod to October being Breast Cancer Awareness Month by using a breast cancer topic. So let's say we're interested in doing an RFP related to hormone receptive positive breast cancer. And for those of you who are scientists, remember, I'm not a scientist, I'm a grants manager, so just keep that in mind and forgive any errors I may have on this topic. But let's go ahead and we're going to pull up a saved search that I have here. And you can see that within seconds, I've been able to search the entire dimensions database that has over 110 million pubs, 1.5 million data sets, 5.5 million grants, 40 million patents, and over 500,000 clinical trials and policy documents each. And we get our list of results, which is what you are seeing here. So my search is a combination of using an existing classification system. And in this case, it's the ICRP cancer type category, where I'm looking for records that we've classified as breast cancer, and a keyword using some Boolean logic. And when I click on this search, you can see here that I have selected full data, but I could have opted to do the title and abstract only, or if I had already written a description of the RFP or a draft of it, I could dump that entire description into the abstract search, because Dimensions has the ability to search based on an entire block of text. So now that we have our list of publications, we could export the lists if we wanted, or we can go ahead and explore using the analytical views, which is what we'll go ahead and do now. So perhaps we want to explore the results by the ICRP classification system, the Common Scientific Outline here. And we can see the count of publications by the CSO category. We could go ahead and look at it as a timeline. This could show us if we're seeing more in this area, and it looks like we are. We could also look at this as an overview section, and we can see that growth mirrored here. I can also head into the funders that are listed on these pubs, and let's go to that section. And when it comes to looking at grant or funding data in Dimensions, there are two paths. So the first is what we're looking at here, which is where we have found funding acknowledgement data within publications. The second, which we'll look at in a minute or so, is where we have grant data directly from funders. Now, when it comes to the funder information from pubs, we have thousands of funders because we're getting information from the publications directly. When we're looking at grants coming directly from the funders, we have over 5.5 million grants with details like abstracts worth over $1.8 trillion from over 500 funders globally, so quite extensive and useful. So within this funders analytical views, I could, again, look at a timeline if I wanted, similar to what I showed you before, or let's go ahead and choose a heat map instead. And this way we can look at a grid of the funders by the ICRP CSO code. So let's go ahead and select that down here. And this gives me an idea of where the funders have shown interest based on the number of pubs they've supported in each of the different areas within the search. And knowing who else is funding in this area is useful for several reasons, like if looking for potential collaborators or co-sponsors on the project. And it's worth pointing out that for any of these lists or graphs, you can export. Oops. There we go. There we go. So you can play with the information outside of the Dimensions UI. And there are other ways that you can explore this publication data, but I want to take some time to look at where we have the grant data in the Dimensions search. So let's go ahead and we're going to go back out here to analytical and head into grants. And I can see that the grant list is limited, but when it comes to grant data, sometimes taking out the categorization can be useful. So let's do that. And here I can see that we've got over 12,000 grants with this text in either the title or abstract. Again, I can click on the analytical views and explore this list of grants in the same way that we just explored the publications, like looking at how the grants are categorized, who's funding them, et cetera. Because we don't have lots and lots of time, I don't want to be repetitive, so let's go ahead and move to the next step in our process. So our next step is to find experts, and there are two places you can do this within Dimensions. One is within the general search area, which is where we were just looking, and the other is a feature called Reviewer Identification. So let's head back into Dimensions to look at these. Let me open on my other screen. Hold on. All right. So going back into my Save Search here, we can go back into our analytical views for the publications, and there is a section for researchers here. And this is where I can see who is publishing the most in this particular area. And let's say we want to go back and look at the grant data. Again, we go to grants. I'll move this particular code. Apparently I want to move faster than my bandwidth. I'll blame my husband. Too many people working from home. So again, we can go over here and see who the researchers are. And we can see how many grants, when the grants were, how much they were given. Now, it's worth noting that I've spent most of the time so far talking about this main results screen here, but there's also this filter panel on the left. And the filters available depend on the data source you're in. So for example, open access is available in publications, but not grants. Makes sense. And then active years and grants, but not publications. So maybe I want to limit the list of grants to only researchers who've started in the last few years in this area, so we know that they're just working on them very recently. So by selecting a whole slew of them, we can say limit it to those. And this method of looking for experts would be useful when trying to find potential applicants or build a review committee ahead of having actual applications. And again, I could have used the RFP description as my search criteria instead of keywords and classifications, or even a combination of the two. So now let's go ahead and look at an option for when you have a specific application. So for this, we go to the workflow for reviewer identification, through a workflow, reviewer identification. And I have an application already created. We'll head into that. And if you are super familiar with this topic, you might recognize that this is an actual NCI grant recipient, just because I wanted to use some real data. So you can enter in the title, applicant name, institutions, abstract, and the system's going to pull out relevant concepts, and you'll see that over here. And you can even tweak them if you want, make it something required, ignore, adding in other concepts. Let's say I'm done, and I want to go and save this. It's going to take me out to my main page. We're going to go back to that same grant, and now we are going to go and look at reviewer identification. And thanks for your patience, it loads. All right, so here we can see the list of experts, and they're sorted by those that are most relevant, which you can see indicated by this bar here. The bigger the bar, the more relevant they are. And you can also limit who you see. So let's say I want to limit this to, US and Canada, or maybe even just US. I'll just pick US and Canada for now. You can also limit by how long they've been publishing, and you can actually switch to grants. So if you wanted to look at grantees instead of authors, you could do that too. Within the list of publications, within the list of people, you're going to see information about who they are, the publishing time frame, the number of relevant pubs out of total pubs, if we've been able to identify a conflict. So let's go ahead and click this first person who doesn't have a conflict, and I can see profile of this person. So we've got some stats at the top, timeline of their research outputs over time, fields of research, concepts, co-author network, who they've been funded by, then followed by lists of pubs, grants, etc. And so this information can help you figure out if this person is a good fit for the application. I want to go back up to the co-author network for a second. This can be particularly useful when looking for more people to add to the committee, or when looking for an alternative for the person we're looking at right now. So for example, maybe we know this person is very senior and has limited availability, or this person is great but they have a conflict. This would allow us to see other people in their orbit who we might want to use as alternatives. All right, so let's go back. So before we go to the next step in our RFP process, I want to point out that there's a lot more that you can do within the reviewer identification feature. Like you can find experts for reviewers in bulk, which is where you can add multiple applications to a committee and search for experts who could be assigned to more than one of those applications. You can also search for experts without an actual application. You can cluster your applications by subject, which is useful if you want to break out the applications received into different committees. So there's a lot more that you can do in both the Dimensions UI and outside of it with the data. Luckily, last year we recorded a webinar devoted to this topic that discusses in detail, finding experts, the tips and tricks. If you want a copy of that, you can see my email address at the bottom. Drop me a line. I'm happy to send you the recording. And then before we move on to the last step in our RFP process, I want to point out that the reviewer identification feature also includes something called overlap check. And I don't have time for that today, but it is an important part of the review process, seeing how similar the application you received is to other grants already out there. All right, so next, we have our last step. What was the impact of our funded research? And impact can be measured in lots of different ways, like no one way is right. We don't take sides. It really just depends on what your program or organization is trying to achieve. But these are the typical questions we get. They certainly aren't the only ways of measuring impact, and they definitely aren't the only ways that we can help. These questions are just the ones that come up the most for the nonprofit funders. We don't have time to address them all today, so I'm going to focus on the first 5, the ones in bold, because the last 3 are really more common either for early career awards or for entire portfolio comparison. So the first step is figuring out which publications resulted from the funding, and then from there, you can work on figuring out their impact. So let's go ahead and head into Dimensions. I keep wanting to open my other screen. That's fine. And so I wanted to continue with my theme of breast cancer research. So I have selected Komen in here as my funder organization. And it's pretty easy to select your funder. You just use the funder filter here. And then from there, I could also limit the publication list to a certain time period or a subject matter to align with my RFP, or even limit it by the researchers. And when looking for those with a high number of citations, I could just sort my list by citations, see those at the top, and then explore those pubs. So let's go ahead and look at the first one. So I can see information about the publication at the top, title, authors, where they are, abstract. And on the right, I can see the citations and other metrics like RCR. In case there are a few of you who aren't familiar with RCR, it's a normalized citation metric, which is a great way to account for different citation patterns in field and time. We supported the development of this by the Office of Portfolio Analysis at NIH, so we really hope that y'all are familiar with it. We can also look at some of the other impact indicators like the altmetric score, and this indicates that there's been a fair amount of public engagement with this particular publication. And while citations are a great indication of academic engagement, altmetric is used to look at engagement with the entire community, like news mentions, blog posts, Twitter. Moving down the page, we have publication references, the supporting grants. Then we get to more impact factors like the pub citations, patent citations, and clinical trial citations. And these are indicators that the work we help support has had some downstream impact. So for example, receiving a citation from a patent may indicate that the publication contains prior art relevant to an invention. And this is important for a funder because it allows them to show contributions to the invention, even if they aren't directly the patent assignees, which doesn't happen very often. So if there were any policy document references, we would see these in the same section. So before I turn this over to Jen, there are a few final notes I have. So first, I acknowledge that I kind of raced through that impact piece, which is possibly the most important part, but I promise you I have reasons. We did a webinar on this not too long ago, specifically about this. And again, if you would like a copy of the recording, just drop me a line and I'll send it to you. The other reason is Duane and Jen will be touching on impact with different approaches and ideas on how they can be addressed, so I knew this would be covered more. The second big point is that there are many other ways to tackle all of the topics I mentioned, Again, Duane and Jen will talk some more about those, but there's even more than what they'll talk about. Really, this is just the tip of the iceberg. A couple examples, using API to pull all patent or policy linkages for a list of DOIs, or custom analysis and reporting. For example, last week, the International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders presented on their study of the global landscape of mental health funding that they're doing using Dimensions data and our team of expert analysts. And I'm sure you know what's coming up next because I sound like a broken record. There's a video of this. If you'd like to see it, drop me a line. I'm happy to share that with you. And with that, I will turn this over to Jen. So let me stop sharing. And Jen, I need to hand it over to you, right?
Thank you, Monika. I'm going to try not to be the technical weak link here. See if people can see my screen. You all able to see it?
Yet.
Not yet? Okay. Okay. Let me make sure. Okay. Are you all able to see this? Hello?
No,
not yet.
No? Okay. So I am the technical weak link. Okay. Let's see. Make sure to push it. Monika, you don't happen to have do you happen to have my slides pulled up?
I think I do, but
okay.
I don't have the share screen privileges anymore.
Okay. Chris,
So
would you mind passing it back to Monika? I don't want to take up too much time in trying to work out the technical logistics.
Okay. Share my screen. Okay. Well, now I have no idea what happened. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep. Yep. That's me. Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So sorry about that. As Monika mentioned too earlier, so and Duane as well. So I sit really within our defense and intelligence community space. So really helping to work with our partners within the defense space and intelligence community to really get at some of those same types of questions that Monika mentioned. So she did a really good job stepping through the UI, showing you sort of the power of that. And really today, I thought it would be easiest and best to really talk about sort of those use cases within the defense space to focus on some more of the custom analyses that we have that we typically provide for our different defense consumers. So again, as Duane mentioned, nothing sensitive here that we're talking about, but really just some examples of the types of questions that we get asked. And so really sort of what Monika has up right now really just breaks out essentially those two different types of categories that really most of the questions that we get really fall into. So the first being really that landscape assessment, understanding really what's happening, what's going on around me, really the types of things that our folks need to help make those strategic level decisions really for their organization. So as you can imagine, things like understanding what are those global areas of research, really how are different disciplines converging, are there new disciplines emerging? A lot of our folks within this particular space really want to better understand what that new next thing is. So really understanding sort of how this space is moving. And the second being the portfolio assessment. So understanding, so now that you have a good sense of really that landscape assessment, what exactly is your place within that? So what is your portfolio's contribution to that space? And so I'm sure for those of you who manage a variety of different portfolios, the question of really understanding sort of what the gaps are in your portfolio, that's a very common one. Understanding when you do that overlay and take a look at that landscape assessment, are there things that you really could be working on that you're not working on? Do you have an overrepresentation of sort of what you're doing in that space? And as Monika touched on, and I'll show you a little bit later, getting into more of that specific question about impact. That's a really common question, but a very, very, very challenging one for a lot of our folks, a lot of our different consumers. And really sort of getting at too, sort of understanding more about that funding landscape. How can they best maximize the funding that they have in terms of the folks that receive awards on their within their organization. And then ultimately too, a very common one as well, understanding just in general, what is that global research output of those particular individuals that they funded. Next, please, Monika. Thank you. So I thought here the easiest way to really even just to describe that was really to take a visual to really, and I know throughout the symposium, we've seen a variety of different landscape analyses, But really, I just wanted to use this to kind of frame up some of what we've already discussed. So I know Duane mentioned as well, and I think Monika honed in on as well too, that we have a wealth of biomedical sciences information, but that really is not the entirety of what we have. And so this, what you're looking at right now, really is an example of a 10-year snapshot, and really essentially about 20 million publications. And you can see it's across a variety of disciplines. So the colors represent the different disciplines. Here we have it broken up nicely to about 9. And those dots, those nodes, essentially represent those areas that are really just what we've defined as topic areas. And so Duane really focused a lot on talking about that middle part in that graph that he showed, where a lot of that legwork is done for that enrichment. A lot of the strength of what we do at digital science is really having these things categorized and broken out based upon the title and the abstract, so that legwork is done for you. So that allows you to really, once that part is done, it allows you to really get in and answer some of those more specific questions, like the ones in the bottom left. So getting at those major global research areas, so looking sort of, if you're looking at the size of the nodes here, getting a better sense of really how large they are. Then really, too, getting a better sense, too, of those trends. So this is over a 10-year time period, but imagine if we really start to fragment that up and break it so that you can really start to see those changes a little bit more granular. Another really is monitoring the convergence in different disciplines. So imagine that you have, so for example, now during the pandemic, I would imagine there's going to be a wealth of information, a wealth of research based upon really what the sociological impacts of this pandemic are. So you can imagine you're looking at sort of the red dot for the biological sciences and the orange dot, which I think, yes, it's orange relative to the social sciences and humanities, understanding where those things converge and really drilling down deeper to understand sort of what that research space really looks like. And again, to understanding for a lot of our folks too, it really, the interesting part about a lot of this research really is that white space. It's what's happening in that space that we really don't see. Is there anything bubbling up to the surface that we want to make sure that if we're not necessarily involved in, at least we're monitoring it and seeing sort of what's happening there. Next slide, please. Thank you, Monika. And another really common question that we get for folks is understanding really what is the influence of their specific organization, sometimes within a specific discipline. So what is their unique contribution? I think a lot of people oftentimes get this question, particularly when they're managing different portfolios. So I thought a great way to really frame that up was really just to look at a specific discipline. So here we're looking at the biological sciences, specifically those within the U.S. biological sciences. And really, just for the purpose of examples, we're looking at DOD's portfolio in the U.S. biological sciences, as well as NIH's portfolio. And really, this is the type of analysis that our analysts do really well. And this is using what's called the location quotient. So I'm sure in this forum, the majority of people are familiar with what that is. But if you're not, you could think of a location quotient really essentially as a metric that really tells you just how overrepresented or underrepresented a certain body of work is compared to a larger body. And so here, what you're seeing essentially is if you look at that lower right quadrant, you're looking at really how well DOD is doing within the space of U.S. biological sciences. So what are those topic areas essentially that they're really strong in, that they have that overrepresentation in? And the same thing, if you look diagonally, you're looking at the same thing relative to NIH. What are those areas in particular that they're really strong in? And while it's really awesome to use this to kind of tease apart what the strengths of an organization are, what I find to be really, really informative about these types of graphs is that really that green quadrant and that white one, to me, are the one where you really get into that sweet spot of understanding a little bit more, things that are a little bit more actionable, things that allow you to make those more tactical decisions. So understanding where there may be areas where those two organizations may overlap, where they're both really strong in. Maybe those are areas where you may want to collaborate together, or looking at that white space where there are areas that you have that underrepresentation. So maybe phylogenomics isn't necessarily the space within which, DOD should be focusing in. So for some folks, even that white space, while it shows that they may not be working in that area, for them, it really, really focuses on sometimes just firming up that their portfolio is focused in the right and appropriate areas. Next, please, Monika. Thank you. And another graph too that we often get requests for is what's called a Sankey diagram. And so definitely not intended to be an eye chart for you. I know you can't unravel all those lines, but the idea being on the left side of the graph, you have funders. On the right side of the graph, you have awardees. And so a really common question that a lot of our consumers get is really understanding who else is funding in this space. Like who else, what other organizations are really within their own specific discipline doing a lot of the funding. I know oftentimes, too, people get asked to do these budget exercises, say in the event your budget is cut. What would be the impact necessarily of pulling your funding within that particular space? So for here, we're talking about within the discipline of 2D materials beyond graphene, just using that as an example. So the way that you look at this and you can view it, for here, we're focusing specifically on those organizations that are receiving DoD funding within this space. And you can see on the right-hand side, there are some organizations who are receiving funding from all branches of DoD. There are some who are receiving funding from a single branch. So really understanding, let's take, for example, the bottom one, you can look at specifically that there are a few organizations who within this specific discipline are only receiving Army funding. So when asked the question of what sort of impact would that have, you can say that at the University of Puerto Rico system, if we were to pull our funding within this particular space, that's the only footprint that DoD currently has there. So it really just allows the folks within our space to get a better sense of the funding landscape that's taking place within a specific discipline and allows them to sort of make those types of decisions that they need. Next one for me, please. Thanks. And the last one too, again, thank you guys for your patience relative to the technical challenges, but this really is the sort of the pinnacle for where I want to end today, because I think of all the different types of analyses that we're asked to do, again, getting back to this larger question of impact, it's a really challenging question to answer, and you can answer it in so many different ways. One of the folks on our team really wanted to work through this example, which really, for me, it's near and dear to my heart. Even though I'm a biophysicist, I'm actually a computational biologist. So for me, the timing of all this was really just very interesting. So for this particular example, what we wanted to look at was an initial investment that DARPA made within the space of computational biology. So this is, if you're in that space, you know that around 2000, this is really when things were really just starting to start to mesh together, and really a sweet spot for that discipline sort of converging. And so understanding what happened to that $5 million investment that they made there, what can we say was the impact of it? And so what we're looking at here really is that starting with that initial seed funding, we can really start to peel apart the layers of really the impact of that initial investment. So looking at the blue, which really is publications, you see that there's a handful of publications over that time period. I'm sure you probably can't see the years, it's fairly small, but essentially there's a handful of publications over about 10 years from that initial investment, which is really good. But if you look beyond that, look at sort of that blue, that next layer, that blue, you start to see some of the citations that are happening that are really pulling and citing from that initial seed investment. So you see that even 20 years past, when those papers were first published, they continue to be cited, so continue to contribute to the research ecosystem. And then that next layer, we're looking at patents, and we see that about 6 years out, we start to see that patents, we can tie them back to this initial seed investment. And lastly, the yellow, just that thin layer, but really focusing a bit more on those policy documents and showing that we also have policy documents that we can tie to this. And so for me, the reason why I really like this graphic is because I think it really summarizes what we do well at digital science. It's a lot of the foundational stuff that Duane mentioned relative to linking the data sets together that allows us to really be able to tell this very cohesive story that otherwise really would have been a bit more one note. So really just, it could possibly have stopped at the publications or even the citations, but we really wouldn't have seen really what was behind there. And even at the increment of 20 years. So with that, and I think there may have been some questions in regards to the methodology, but I definitely want to make sure that to show this and focus on really sort of the breadth of what we're capable of doing. And please feel free to drop any questions as well into the chat. And with that, I want to thank Monika for driving and pass it back to Duane.
All right. Thank you very much, Monika and Jennifer. That was, although I've seen the presentation before, hearing it again, I'm still impressed. So thank you very much for the presentation. And we've got a lot of questions. Hopefully everyone found that very valuable. So I want to wrap up here with just some take-home messages about this presentation, about Dimensions. First is that Dimensions provides a flexible way to use and to access research data to inform decisions. So by that, I mean, we've got a lot of different access points. Monika was showing a lot from the web application. The data is also available by bulk data. I saw in the chat I didn't even mention this on the slides, but we have just recently made it available through Google BigQuery. There are many different forms of programmatic access, Google BigQuery, or through application programming interfaces. We've got 2 different APIs. I also saw in the chat references to our training set series. When COVID first hit, we had a pretty good long training series using the analytical API. We also have runtime APIs. So if you want to connect it to another system, the runtime API may be better for that. The analytical API is incredibly powerful. It leverages all of the links among the different data sets. It's really a good resource for analysts. And also in terms of flexible ways to use dimensions, it supports a lot of different kinds of efforts, including, as I mentioned, portfolio analysis, strategic planning, program planning, and evaluation on the government side. Most of this talk was largely focused on government uses, but I think hopefully you can see that there are a lot of ties between what we mentioned and other applications. You can also, I guess the next bullet in terms of take-home message is that all of our data is global. So it's all areas of research and it's all global data. So you can look at trends in different countries in addition to trends within the U.S. government. And we've got over 500 different funders. So it's also nonprofits and other foundations. So you can look at all kinds of trends in terms of funding, in terms of publications, in terms of patents. And when I speak about patents, we often get questions about, is it just patents, just awarded patents or patent applications? It's both. So for all the different content sets, we strive to be pretty comprehensive. Again, it's not going to be complete and perfect, but that's our goal. We're always striving to build out the breadth and depth within each content set and striving to expand the different content sets that are included. So we have global data, all research areas. It's not just biomedical. We don't discriminate in terms of discipline. So you will also find engineering, environmental science, any area of research, social sciences, it's all included. And different kinds of publications. We mentioned publications, but that includes preprints, it includes book chapters, it includes a lot of different kinds of publications. The next important take-home message is that we have data processing and enrichment. I think you can see through Monika and Jennifer's talks that a lot of the analysis leverages the enrichment and processing that we've already applied so that you don't have to, for example, when you're trying to define cancer research, if you were to just do that by your own keywords, if you look through the bibliometric literature, there are tons of ways to define it, right? So being able to leverage a common ontology that's already been applied, that already has, F scores of 0.99 or whatever it may be for the individual area, it's just a helpful way to get started without having to define it every single time on your own. And we didn't get into all the different features and functions within the web application, but there are saved searches, there are saved groups and other things like that can make your searching really easy. You can even get alerts when a new publication or a new grant is out that meets your search criteria. And as I think Monika mentioned, we do a lot in terms of metrics, right? So Monika mentioned the relative citation ratio from the Office of Portfolio Analysis, a good normalized citation metric. There's a field citation ratio, and they're beyond what's just in the application. We have a host of different metrics that you can access either through the application programming interfaces or through working with us directly. Another key take-home message is that we also do offer analytical services. So we've got some folks on site at different government agencies, helping with topic modeling, impact studies, and just working with working groups, supporting them in answering questions as you're developing FOAs or just trying to, responding to congressional inquiries, those sorts of things. So please do feel free to reach out to us with any questions. We've got our email addresses all listed there for any general questions or just general questions about data or more fundamental questions. Please send that to support@dimensions.ai. We've got a whole team of folks that respond to the emails there. We all see that. So that's probably the best way to get your general questions answered. And also we'd advise you or we'd hope that you go ahead to the website, www.dimensions.ai. That's the broader website. It's got a lot of information there. It's also got a link to app.dimensions.ai, which is a web application. There is a ton, as you've seen in the chat, there is a ton of resources that we have available online, a lot of recordings, a lot of a very lengthy document that explains our data methodology and how we've developed it, how we've worked with the community to develop it. So that's, I guess those are the key take-home messages. I've tried to answer all of the questions as we've been going along here in the chat, but I'll double check and see if there's anything else, any new questions that have arisen since my last answer there. Or Monica or Jen, can you call out if there are any questions that you see there?
I did not see any. You did a tremendous job answering them while we were talking about it, I think.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad I'm a fast typer. They're coming pretty fast.
There was something, and it was about Google BigQuery, but I don't know if it was actually a question.
Okay.
The comment was, and a few days ago, they announced integration with Google BigQuery, which I will not pretend to understand much about, you and me both, which sounds very interesting. Webinar on that was today, missed it. So not quite a question, but yes, we now have integration with Google BigQuery.
All right, fantastic. So that covers everything that we've intended to cover today. Please do feel free to reach out if you've got additional questions. We've got our email addresses there. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll give you back 4 extra minutes. So you'll have a just over a 15-minute break. And please do come back for the next session. Again, that's with Anna Van Gulik, who's presenting a lot on a very interesting topic with BigShare. So thank you very much.
And once again, I just want to jump in here. Thank you again to Duane, Jen, and Monika for a great training session. So again, as Duane mentioned, we are going to be breaking here for about a 15-minute break, but please do come back. I think we've got a really great session lined up next on funder perspectives in bibliometrics and research assessment. So please do come back for the final session of the day, which will start at the top of the hour or 5 p.m. Eastern. Thanks.